Okay,
We're
welcome to
live.
the June meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. Two items that I want to focus on tonight. First is the wastewater treatment study. Nick Bono from H2M was not able to make it tonight. He gave me some notes, and he's going to come to our next meeting to make a formal presentation. I just want to tell everyone what he's working on, and then some other things that are happening. So Nick Bono at H2M has started his wastewater treatment study. What he started with, which I believe we discussed at the last Planning Commission meeting, is creating a service area, which would be in two parts: an initial service area that's focused on the Main Street, Jobs Lane, Windmill Lane, Nugent Street block, and a secondary service area which would include the rest of the remainder of the business district. The first service area does include the North Sea Road corridor, which is, as we all know, the major drainage corridor in the business district. And so he's in the midst of working on that. He's coming up with flows for each of those areas, both current and projected at full build out under the zoning, which is what the law requires us to look at. And then Brian Egan, the village council, will take that and begin to create the bylaws for a sewer district. That's the first piece of his study. The second piece that his study is looking at, and Mark Schiffer, as I know, has talked both to Nick and to some others, is the options that are available to the village to service that area. And there are three that he's looking at and thinking about. One is the existing plant at the hospital. Second is building a plan to service the business district somewhere in the North Sea Road corridor, including the site that Mark Schiffer described 2 months ago at the Planning Commission meeting. And third, the utility of the village hooking into a plan to be built at the college campus. With the idea, obviously, that since the hospital is planning to move to the college campus, and part of that move is creating a new sewer facility, whether or not that's a site, could you in effect build that facility now and reverse? So rather than have us use the existing hospital plan, have the village be part of building a new plant that the hospital would hook into. So those are the three options that he's looking at. I don't know if Mark, if you want to comment on those options before we go. I know you have some strong feelings about those.
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. I think these are like three realistic options. I think the existing, to hook into the existing hospital, I think is worth studying, even though I do not think that it is an appropriate location for a sewage treatment plant. Among, that there's the Keene development right next to it. There's like major mansions right next to it. It's on the way going to the Fortune Estates. So I don't think it's really the location for a sewage treatment plant. It's been there because the hospital was there, and only servicing the hospital, it's servicing a minimal amount, but it's really not to do a municipal wastewater treatment plant at that location. But I think for many reasons it should be studied, because it's true that from an engineering standpoint or from a technical standpoint, if we didn't have that social element, or that it's a great location for it. It's the other plant on the North Sea area, which I think is right next to the cemetery. I think you couldn't get a better site for a sewage treatment plant right next to the cemetery, right next to a major highway, for the trucks to be able to service that sewage treatment plant, because eventually all of the the waste from the sewage treatment plant has to be trucked out to in Long Island. Everything gets trucked out to Bergen Point. So I think that that location is a very, very good location. And then the third alternative to create like a pump stations and to be able to connect it all the way to the college campus is definitely a possibility. And that would create a corridor for other areas to be able to connect into it. It's a much ground plan, but it's definitely something that should be studied. You know, in terms of timing, I think that the second alternative is the one that would go the fastest, because if we have to wait for the college plant to come on board, it's going to take a little while.
Right. And then I should mention that there is a private group that has proposed to the village that that the sewer treatment plant, that's wastewater treatment be financed on a private bid basis using the Suffolk County IDA. And under that circumstance, the village would in effect license them as almost like a utility, like they were the telephone company or the electric company. And there would be a service charge that would be charged to everybody in the sewer district, and then the financing would be on a private basis, not a public basis. It has the advantage, obviously, of avoiding using the village's tax base and credit level, but it does mean somewhat less control by the village of the process.
But if I can add to this, I think that to try to do a public-private partnership on this project is a very, very good idea. I think that in most of the union, in most of the states, this method of procurement and is really the favored method for sewage treatment plant, wastewater, water filtration plant. Those public-private partnerships are really, but in New York State, there is legislation that prevents that, because it's viewed by many as a way to circumvent union rules, you know, and like the prevailing wages requirements from a municipality. So I think that this really, Brian has to really review this for the village, but it would definitely be a better way and a faster way to do it.
So, any questions about that? I am hoping that when we do this in July, we'll be able to have an in-person meeting. We'll see what happens, but
Yes.
perhaps, because I think it would be better if we could do that.
And in the scope, Paul, are they defining the areas that would be served? Are they different for different locations, or is the service area
to some extent? Yes. So yeah, thank you for asking that. So I think the thought is that a phase one area could be served by the existing hospital plant if you wanted to. Whereas there is sufficient capacity in the hospital plant to do that phase one. So that's one of the reasons why we've been asked to look at phase one, because as I think everyone knows, the trustees and the mayor feel a great deal of urgency about this. Phase one, in theory, you could do at an existing plant. Phase two, probably would not do at the hospital plant, but we'll see what he says. And so maybe phase two is either at phase two, you do build the bigger plant up on the highway, or you wait and you do it as part of the college's work. And I think, the other thing is, coming out of COVID, we don't know yet whether the hospital's time frame has changed. It's building a new hospital.
Right.
I mean, my only other comment would be, yeah, as the planning commission, to be thinking about the impact on land use.
Yep.
It's one thing to look at the technical aspects of a sort of treatment plant, but I think I know there's been talk about looking in discrete ways at different things happening in the village right now.
Yep.
But I think you have to really project out what this might do over the long run, and how to be prepared for that from a land use perspective.
Right.
If I can add, I would like to go ahead, Ben.
Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, I think that I'd like to go back to what Joe was actually suggesting at our last meeting, is that maybe we should look at developing a new master plan. That the master plan that was developed so many years ago, I think, is somewhat outdated and doesn't reflect the realities of today. And I thought Joe had suggested that, and I thought it was a very, very good suggestion.
I also wanted to say that I did attend, along with Jeff Broadleaf, the Lake Agawam Conservancy meeting from last week, and they also are very anxious to see things done within the village as well as for their own properties, in terms of upgrading wastewater systems and so forth. The question I would have for Paul, though, does this new do these independent private partnerships, do they also include the decentralized system? So let's say, we do the hospital plant, but then that doesn't cover everyone. So if a private property wanted to do a cluster system with a bunch of people, does this bonding or whatever, does that include, does this firm cover that as well?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. It's a very good question, and I'll add that for Nick for next month. I don't know the answer to that.
Because I think the only way to get this, even through, is to go with these people who the firm who does who carries the debt service. Because I don't see the village public wanting to vote to inadvertently raise their taxes by any means. So obviously that could be a big relief for a lot of residents.
But I think that, personally, I don't think it will increase the taxes. I think it may increase the tax base by allowing, additional hotel development or some additional commercial development. But I don't think that I believe that it could be structured in a way that it doesn't really have an impact on taxes for the majority of the residents.
Well, I think to the point about master planning, that should be assume that would be understood as part of the results of the study. What is the cost and the impact on public funds?
Right. So let me maybe go to the second issue that Eldon brought up, because I think the two, and that Joe brought up at the last meeting, because the two do fit together very tightly. So we have a zoning text that was created several years ago and allows for further development in the village, mostly on Windmill Lane and New Nugent Street. But that study, in terms of how it would be, and that's what Nick is going to use to come up with some demand and numbers. However, that assumed that the retail sector would expand. And which I think, Eldon, is where you were going to some extent, and certainly where Joe was going. And that's not it's probably not and Mark, you would definitely say, as opposed to today, that's probably not the most realistic view of what could happen at this point. If anything, I think, and Eldon's more expert than any of us on this, but I think it's going to be, our job is going to be to strengthen the retail space that exists and support it, not necessarily build a lot more, because it's not clear that there's enough retailers out there to occupy it. So
too much.
Sorry?
We have too much as it is.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of retail space and a lot is not occupied, and some of it hasn't been occupied for a long time. So However, there are, and that's sort of, that was just in going to the points that's been made. So, when we were working on the hostel plan, one of the interesting things I think that came up was looking in a more diverse way of what the needs are in the village at this point, which really is a master plan issue. And we picked James Lehman and his team, I think because we thought they had a good handle on how to do that analysis. If you look at that in terms of the village center, I think the issue that Mark and Joe, you and Eldon have all been raising is, what is the right thing to look at this point, right? What makes sense and what is likely to be built? Because if you're going to do a sewer plant, you want to make sure it's relating to what's the market is. And so whether it's, further condominium development or further hotels, as Mark talked about, or whether it's office space now that, working remotely seems to be more relevant than ever. Sort of looking at what the business space is of the village and figuring out how that relates to the village center, I think is becoming very urgent. Because we can make all the investment we want, but if we don't provide for for what people can and should build, it's not going to get us very far.
I was just going to say that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That obviously clear to everyone, we've had just tremendous amounts of change in such a short amount of time, and businesses globally are rethinking their strategies and their plans. So, the village of Southampton is no different. I mean, I think that whatever the strategy and the plan was 10 years ago or 5 years ago may not be the same. Right. And we really should, as the Planning Commission, be looking at it. I mean, I'm always conscious of use of public funds, and I don't think we should be, wasting money on fees where we don't need to. But this seems like a pretty compelling moment to really think about what the right uses will be, what the possible uses will be going forward, how population might change. There's a lot of things which could be positive that come out of this.
Right.
And we have to kind of anticipate all that, particularly if we're thinking about any kind of major capital investment, like a sewage treatment plant.
Yes. And I also think that, what the world 20 years ago was a lot more like mosaics, where we had the village on our own, and we had the town, and then there was like, the Tuckahoe section, or there were more. And I think that where we are going towards is much more of there's somewhat of a synergy among all those areas, and I think we need to coordinate. I think transportation is going to be changed in the next 10 years. I think transportation, and with the self-driving cars coming, it's going to be a complete different landscape. So, I think that we should plan for this, and I think that how we integrate our plans with the plans of other areas, surrounding us.
I think that is a great idea to talk more to the town about where their plans are, because we're interconnected with the town in many ways.
Yes, we have a major issue of housing. We have a major issue of transportation.
Right.
Well, that's more the county than the town, really.
Although it's been interesting, I think one of the things that has been interesting to me in the COVID crisis has been the extent to which the village, the town, and the county, and to some extent the state, have all been working together really very, very smoothly. I mean, politics, has sort of been a little bit put aside for a period of time in the context of the crisis. To me, it's been fascinating to watch. It's almost like old style government when people used to get along. So it's just interesting. And I think, one of the initiatives, in the last few years, sort of going along Eldon's point, was when the state legislatures from the East End came up with the funds for the MTA to provide a shuttle service on the Long Island Railroad. on the theory that you needed to find a way to get some of the people who come into the East End to work, give them an option because of the tremendous traffic problems we've had recently. And sometimes, when there was an accident, you'd have a traffic backup that would affect the entire East End and Up Island. So, that was started, I guess, about 2 years ago. It started very slow, but it's now quite successful, and getting a very steady ridership. So it's a good example of the point of, working with the town and the county to think about sort of how you want things to work going forward. And I think it affects us, I guess one thing, and, I guess the question is whether this is permanent or temporary, but certainly, these, when these crises happen, they're often, they create a reset button in some ways. The two things that I think are so interesting is, number one, the number of families who are coming out to the Hamptons right now, and what that potentially means for Southampton. And then secondly, related to that, is more acceptance of remote working.
Yeah.
So if you put those two together, then I think you would say you need more housing options and you need more work options. And that speaks to, I think, a village. To looking at a village as opposed to a more spread out point of view. So that's so the mayor had asked James Lima to come in. He did a walkthrough, put together a proposal. I think what I'm hearing is everyone on this call, Laura, I'd like to see what you think, but we all think, it sounds like we need to study that, I should say, for the village, like what is the right mix in the village center that is what in theory this sewer is going to serve.
Yes, and I also think that when you brought up the traffic, I don't think that we as a group in the village really foresaw how much the increase in traffic has impacted the village. I mean, right now it's like every day on Hill Street and on Hampton Roads. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's a traffic jam, that because people are trying to move from County Road 39, trying to find shortcuts, and all the shortcuts a lot of them are through the village.
Mm-hmm.
Those are mostly trades, Mark, and those people, as you know, those individuals, they were out of work for 2 months, and now they're trying to play catch up on their given projects. So that's the biggest factor as to why we're dealing with all these traffic jams, in the last few days. Not that it hasn't been an issue before, but certainly that's what has been attributed to this large influx in the last few days with opening up. So construction that was supposed to be finished, a month ago is now, a month behind. So that's
right. So, I think there's some feeling in the village, and then I want to get to that in a minute because there's been some ideas out there. There's some feeling in the village that, we have to deal with the immediate crisis for the merchants, and shouldn't be at the master plan is something we can deal with later. But I think just we as a planning commission can remind the trustees and the mayor that we think this is something that is urgent because, and to just Eldon's point before, again, if we're going to do a wastewater treatment system, it really is raising the issue of what do we want Nugent Street and Windmill Lane to look like, not just physically, but in terms of the uses that are there.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, as someone who's been in the market to buy a condominium recently, it's an amazingly underserved sector here.
Yes.
There's very little out there. Most of it was built in the 70s or 80s at the latest. Other than the Village Latch, there's actually no new product in the village at all.
Well, there's the pond.
Sorry?
There's the ponds, of course.
Yeah. So and I think demand is going to be intense, particularly if families come back to the village because of the ability to work remotely. The opportunity is going to be for older people who want to sell their houses. that opportunity is going to be there, but they have no place to go if they want to stay. And I think, we went through a wave in Southampton. I remember well, probably Laura does, and maybe who has been around here? Joe, you do?
Yeah, I probably would.
Everyone who lived in the village was selling their house and moving to North Carolina. It felt like that should be Southampton South or something. But I think that's a different population than the population we have now.
Well, what I'd like to say though, too, to your point, Paul, I think we have to contribute this COVID issue to very similar to 9/11, from the standpoint that yes, 20 years later we do have more of a ability to work from home and anywhere in the world, even from our phones. However, I do think we have to be prepared for this to be in a influx as well. Yes, people are here now, but they could very well go back to some degree come a vaccine. So I don't want to be too afraid to overshoot this. I think we have to be cautious rather than too presumptuous when it comes to how much we're going to need in terms of housing going forward. Of course, I think there's a demand regardless to what you're saying, but I think we have to be very careful as to how we proceed, as you said. So those are my 2 thoughts on that.
Okay.
So
is everyone in favor of requesting that the village go forward with James Lehman's update of the plan? Anybody opposed?
I do not.
Yeah, Zeldin, I think it's great. So.
Eduardo, hello.
Hello. I just came in late and I haven't followed this whole discussion, so I can't comment.
Okay.
I don't know what we're talking about right now.
We'll catch you up.
But I think it should be either an update or a rewriting.
It's really an update. I mean, I think what was clear when James Lima looked at the master plan is the role here is not to change the zoning that we approved, to change the design guidelines. It's really to think more about uses. Because that assumed uses that really, retail on the ground floor, housing above. I'm not sure. We don't know yet whether that's. I mean, certainly, I think the world has changed. It was beginning to change there, but it's changed much more radically. The idea that you would provide a lot more retail space is hard to justify at this point.
But I think we should.
If I remember with Stan when we did the zoning, if I'm catching up appropriately, you said that the uses should really be left to the user, not defining uses. Then you're really trying to create marketplace, trying to create things that may not be appropriate. Let the users decide the use.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should just examine the existing one and go through point by point and see what needs to be reviewed or revised. So I would say an examination first before an update.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'd also want to add to that by saying that unfortunately, the master plan that was done 20 years ago, yes, it's very outdated, but also to some degree was not adhered to from the standpoint that the village wanted to preserve land that wasn't preserved for various reasons. So there's various aspects as to why things didn't go the way the village may have thought they would have. For example, Bishop Pond was supposed to be a 9-hole golf course. So there's many things that were not adhered to. Now that doesn't say that you have to, just because it says that you have to do it, but I think whatever plan we put forward, if we're going to do this investment, we have to make sure we actually adhere to it going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was not adhered to previously.
Right.
You should have a golf course at Bishop's Pond. That'd be great.
The whole thing was supposed to be a golf course. That's what it says.
So let me bring up then related to more immediate ideas, and Eldon, if particularly you could comment on this. So, the village, there's been a lot of meetings going on. I think maybe Joe and perhaps Mark has been at some of them with talking about some potential options for the village, and particularly this summer. Thought that there's going to be an urgent need to create some activity. So one of the things that they've talked about is, and a lot of places are doing, is making it much easier to do outside food service, which the village has started with. It has been very successful, and they really want to expand it this summer. And I know there's been work by the committee to make it easier to get permits for outdoor seating, which is great.
Great.
I just think, for a while now, people are going to be much more comfortable sitting outside than inside. However, just to sort of, I know it sounds dumb and obvious, but the problem is once you start doing that, the area on the sidewalks gets much more constrained. And again, just people are very concerned about being in close quarters and not social distancing, at least some. So one of the things that has come up in that context is whether or not there should be a program at certain times to close streets, to provide for more area for walking, and maybe create a different atmosphere in the village, particularly at night, because our activity at night is very low, to say the least. So, Eldon, one thought I had that I wanted you to comment on, wanted to hear people's ideas, was to propose that the village as a pilot close Job's Lane at night for a few hours during, and maybe it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights to begin with, and to really, because that street is of a scale that I think it could be a comfortable sort of walk and bike stroll. But Eldon, wanted your thoughts. You do a lot of this. Anybody else on the commission to talk about what their thoughts are about those sort of ideas?
I'll say one quick thing, and that is I was looking at some of the old documents in legal planning documents, and back in 1970, there was a plan to close Job's Lane permanently as a pedestrian. I'm not advising that to do that, but I'm just saying that there was a plan 50 years ago to do that. And I think I spoke with Eldon about it. I think that back in those days, and maybe Paul, you can add to this too, that was kind of a trend in terms of planning to close streets to traffic. I know that that's been a big thing in the city. It hasn't always worked out, I'm sure, as we all know. So as long as it's not permanent, I think it would be an interesting idea to look at.
So Eldon?
Well, I think we should close between Hampton Road and Herrick. Just close it. And include Job's Lane, if you're going to do that, because there are more restaurants on Main Street than there are on Job's Lane.
Yes.
So, and that's easy. That's an easy go around if you're in traffic. So from Hampton Road to is it Herrick?
No, Meeting House.
Or is it Meeting House? Okay, to Meeting House, to Hampton, to Job's. If you're gonna do this to encourage restaurants and outdoor dining, then how many restaurants do you have on Main Street?
About 6 or 7.
I think generally.
How many restaurants do you have on Job's?
None.
1,
3.
2,
3.
what?
You have 3?
So I mean, if you're gonna do it, do it big. Do it.
I think
On Main Street, you have St. Ambrose, you have
Turbo.
La Chalot, you have 75 Main, you have
There are
whoever.
the better restaurants on Main Street.
Yeah, bigger. And then on Job's Lane, you have the driver's seat or whatever it's called, Southampton Public House.
the Le Chef.
Public House already has a backyard.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes,
right,
that's true.
right.
You have Le Chef, you have the other one.
Yeah.
And then
it's
you
not
have
like that.
Bamboo at the end of the street.
And you had the new Job's Lane, whatever it's called. It's
Right, Job's Lane Grill or whatever. Yeah.
But
There's
that's
actually an
not
equal
gonna-
number on both streets, that just in different spots. But, something potentially the art center could do something with. I mean, who knows if we start closed streets, what you think of. But Eldon, do you have any thoughts about all of this?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you want to close streets other than for special events. I mean, I think generally you want as much traffic flowing through. You want, I think that's something that the report we had done by Gibbs 5-6 years ago said was we did a really good job managing parking spots, and customers want to get close to the restaurant or the activity. So obviously parking ratios may change as transportation changes, and that's at some point in the future. And I think it's fantastic that they're looking at allowing the street to open up for seating. And I saw them setting up today. That'll be really helpful. That the two things we're seeing a lot of in restaurant right now is moving outside. I don't, that may, won't be permanent. Obviously the winter will stop that, but it's still outdoor is a big element, and digital is a big element as well. So people are expecting to be able to maybe look at a menu, and maybe they're getting more used to using digital tools.
Right.
Having said both of those, I think where the Village Center is well positioned is it is a great traditional main street. And I think it will be well positioned for the future because ultimately it's a fantastic amenity for residents and workers and anyone visiting Southampton. And I think we need to make sure we preserve it. And I think, as Eduardo has said, we don't know what the uses will be in the future. There's going to be a whole new set of uses coming and going, and we'll have to be thoughtful and flexible as we see what economic uses kind of come back. But I do think that structure that we have, that the history and the proximity to other amenities, put it in a good position for the long term. But it's going to be a struggle for a little while as we figure out what that next phase of the economy looks like.
So you would not advise closing streets, and you think Gibbs sort of said, well, you really want to encourage more traffic, right? Do you think would it make sense at night to have more parking turnover available?
Well, I don't think historically the parking, other than a few peak weekends, has been a significant issue. But something that could be looked at, as we kind of just look at the overall issues for the village.
You're breaking up.
That's just it's visibility. I'm sorry. I'm gonna mute.
We're losing you, Eldon.
Yeah.
We're losing you, Eldon.
Yeah.
I think that
I'm going to get to a better location.
I wouldn't turn over the parking at nighttime because that's when people want to go to the restaurants. They want to linger and hang out. So I wouldn't put limits at nighttime for the parking.
Right. I think that the idea of closing the street is a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
And I think we should try it.
Can we close half the street? I mean, because the other problem is that how to reroute traffic and whatnot. But can you close like half a street and have it become a one-way?
Well, I think that I would do it together with additional transportation with those little electric cars that we had that would drive people to their parking area, and then back into the center. But I think it's a very good, it's done in so many big cities where they create, I was not too long ago in Louisiana, in New Orleans, or, it's everywhere where they close streets. And I think it is a very good idea. It's the idea definitely worth trying, I think. And that area from Windmill to close it to Job's Lane, I think it's a very good idea. And then
one thought I had is if you were going to say, look, twice during the summer, we're going to close the street at night. I think
that's no big deal.
I think my experience would be just closing a street doesn't do much. You gotta, if you had entertainment on the street or something, that would make sense because then you create an event. But just closing a street down, to Eldon's point, all you're really doing then is, in a way, creating less traffic. because anyone who drives in is not able to drive in and see what's happening. So if you're going to do something like that, I think you need to have some event.
You have to tie an event to it, or you have to have say every restaurant should have a band or something to keep.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
At that point, they would, if we do this, the Southampton Arts Center, Arts Center would then be able to have events that flow into the streets.
Right.
To,
I think everyone knows we did the silent disco last summer, which was very
successful.
amusing, and it was wildly successful. It was unbelievable. Hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. So I think if you do something that is entertaining, then people could come, and it's an event. But just to me, just closing a street without doing something else is just creating less traffic, not more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we should have a discussion with the people who actually manage the Southampton Arts Center to be able to see, and maybe some of the some of those businesses on Job's Lane.
Right. Jolie, can you go to Jeff? I think he raised his hand.
It was just an idea, an alliteration, Southampton Saturday strolls. Every Saturday night, Job's Lane and Main Street become a pedestrian mall.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they do in Europe too. I mean, a lot of the city centers, close down and they become a pedestrian center, and there's a lot of people because people can walk around, you can shop, no cars, there's more space.
Right.
So it depends. I mean, if it's advertised and it's on certain days, it may be very interesting, especially on a Saturday. People can go out dining and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So if the streets, let me ask a question. If the streets, let's say Main Street and Job's Lane were closed for the Saturday after July 4th, that night, and you could go and stroll, but you would have to park, obviously not on either of those two streets. Who in this group would go?
I would.
I probably would, but you also have to tell the stores to stay open.
Right.
I mean, if the stores close down, all you got is restaurants. You're not going to have people walking around.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well,
it has to be a concerted effort.
Right. You have to say, look, we're going to do this Saturday, July 10th or 11th or whatever that is. But,
yes,
we want every store in the village to be open till 9. Because one of the things that I think is difficult about that is if you're open and there's nothing there, it's not that interesting.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that the business revitalization committee or the I'm sure that committee has been active in that regard. So I would hope that I can go to them if you wish, Paul, and I can talk with them. I have many people who I know who are involved with that.
Yeah, no, they've been asking for our input. That's why we brought it up.
Okay, they asked for our input. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think events are great, Zeldin again, but you have to kind of get the right events. If you just have,
right,
a two-piece band on the corner, it may not do anything.
Right.
And the best events you can have are people watching, and that's why seating outside is so important. And that's something that also is more evergreen. It can happen night after night after night, and not be a 2-hour period where someone pays for a musician. So, as much as you can do to create an overall environment that people are attracted to and want to hang out at is economically more sustainable.
right.
Yeah. So who would we like to take? Maybe Eldon should take the lead on that, and let's do it.
Do you want to talk to Eldon and put together something?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
I can. Anyone else wants to work with me on that's fine. But I'll
work with you on that.
I'll definitely do that.
I'll work with you because I do know quite a few of the people on the restaurants, and I do know a lot of the people on the committee. So I'll be glad to help you out with that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to do it, let's say we could do it for 8 weeks. Every Saturday night, we close the Job's Lanes, and then we have like a theme, and then I think it's a very good idea.
Well, I think that committees set up are already working on a lot of this, but I think we should just touch base and see how we can be supportive.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
On another point, I thought, I don't know if any of the committees have worked on this, but to try to set up a Wi-Fi such that the entire village business center has a Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I think they are working on that. I know they're working on a website, which
Yes,
would
they are,
be
yeah.
an interactive website, but I think they're also working on a Wi-Fi.
Yeah, there
And
should be a Wi-Fi. I mean, New York City has it. All the big cities have it.
Right.
Yeah, we
And
should
they're
have.
currently working on getting more cell service down at the beach, which is their priority.
Yeah, the cell reception at the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think in the village it's important. In the village business center, it's important. In the
Right.
restaurants and and I think if we speak to Altice or Lightpath, the infrastructure is there in the village business center to provide high-speed internet.
I think you have to do it. I think you have to like set it up. I think it's just having done it twice, it's more complicated than it sounds. Like you literally have to place I forget what they're called, but basically the sensors all along the street. You can't just turn on. So there's actually some work and some money, but it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Really good idea. Okay. Anything else?
The other thing that I thought that maybe, we're going to have a lot of, there was an article in the Post about the shortage of workers in the restaurant industries in the Hamptons. And I think that, and there's very little monitoring of, on the restaurant side of the health of those workers. And I don't know if it's something that we could recommend to study or to require that all the restaurant workers, within the village, be either tested or be, and to have a better level of confidence.
Are restaurants required now to do temperature checks? And there's a whole set of state regular.
But I think that the village should enforce that, and I think that we should make it part of the village code or code enforcement to absolutely enforce it. And even though these are county requirements or state requirements, I think that the village should, because they're going to be using a lot of workers that maybe not 100% registered, and I think that there should be a way for us to make sure that our community is protected.
I would read the state regulations. They're very comprehensive in terms of what a restaurant needs to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that the Department of Health and, there's a lot of people looking at those issues already.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, could you just vote on the minutes for me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Vote on the May minutes.
Yeah. I'll make
Quarantine
a motion to accept them.
Which monthly we are.
Except.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So hopefully we'll see what happens. Hopefully our next meeting will be not virtual but real. But we'll see what happens. And the sole topic next time is Nick is going to do a comprehensive presentation. I'm going to try to get it onto the village website before the meeting so people have a chance to comment. So
That's Nick Palumbo?
Nicholas Babono from H2M.
Oh, okay.
What date is that?
Sorry?
What date is
I
that?
think that's a good question because we have July 4th. Let me just
No
check.
parade this year.
Sorry?
No parade this year. They canceled it.
Yeah.
Oh, they canceled it?
Yeah. And no September Fest this year.
They're gonna have fireworks for the fresh air.
Yeah. July 2nd.
So
July-
Thursday, July 2nd?
Yep. You can do it instead
Okay, see you then.
of okay.
Bye.
See you then.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. Bye.
All right, thank you. Bye.